I was on a cruise with my in-laws when my BIL turned to his girlfriend and said, "The abortion pills you put in her vitamins are working perfectly." My hand froze on my beer. He said it in a secret language from my wife's childhood, one she taught me but couldn't remember through the PTSD of 7 miscarriages. I froze. Tino continued, getting cockier. "There's only a month until Grandpa's will reading. If she doesn't have kids by then, we'll get $4 million. Clara cackled like a witch. "Your plan to make sure she's not pregnant was genius. I ain't getting no measly $600K. My wife Olivia sat right next to me, getting ready to take what she thought were her evening vitamins. I immediately sprawled across the table, knocking everything over while pretending to be too drunk on mimosas. You see, I knew telling her would break her heart. After our 5th loss, she'd tried to jump off our balcony, screaming that her body was a graveyard, and her brother was the one to talk her out of it. That night, I waited until everyone was asleep. My hands shook as I swapped all her pills with sugar pills from the ship's store, my mind racing. She was already pregnant again. We'd found out just before the cruise, but hadn't told anyone yet. The next morning at breakfast, I watched my brother-in-law closely. "Olivia felt nauseous this morning," I mentioned casually. "Could be morning sickness." He choked on his coffee. "She's probably just seasick." His girlfriend muttered something in their language about upping the dose. Then came the moment he'd been waiting for. Olivia suddenly grabbed her stomach during lunch, wincing. It was just food poisoning from the cheap sushi, but my BIL's face completely lit up. He actually fist-bumped his girlfriend under the table. In their language, he whispered, "We're gonna be rich, baby." Clara looked at Olivia's retreating form and mumbled in their language, "Do you ever feel, I don't know, a little bad?" Tino snorted. "For what? After the will reading, she can pop out as many as she wants. 7 miscarriages, though. 7 necessary business decisions," he corrected, taking another sip of champagne. The next day, I was refilling our drinks when I heard him on a video call with his biggest client. "You know what, Chandler? Go F yourself. I don't need your peasant money anymore." "Rough day?" I asked innocently, handing him a mojito. "Best day of my life," he slurred, already drunk before noon. "Gonna be so rich I could buy 10 companies like that dump." "Don't you want to wait until you get the will first? You know, don't count your chickens before they hatch." He laughed. "Poor people wait. Rich people plan. Big difference." That's when his girlfriend grabbed his arm, whispering in their language, "If you're so sure the pills worked, why wait? Let's celebrate now." She dragged him toward the ship's luxury boutique, and I watched him max out all his credit cards with the security of money he'd never have. By day 3, he'd completely lost it. I watched him march to the cruise director's desk, demanding to sign their Pinnacle Elite membership. $150,000, the director said carefully. "No problem," Tino slurred, signing the contract. His stupidity made me gasp. In the span of just a few days, he had already spent his entire will allowance on useless garbage. That afternoon at the buffet, when staff asked him to wait in line like everyone else, he exploded. "Do you know who I am?" he screamed. "I'm about to own this cruise line. You're all fired." Security had to escort him back to his cabin while other passengers filmed. The final night's dinner was perfect. My brother-in-law stood up, swaying in his wine-stained designer shirt. "A toast," he shouted, "to new beginnings, to successful business ventures." That's when Olivia lurched from her chair, hand over her mouth, racing for the bathroom. My brother-in-law actually smirked. "Too much rich food for her delicate stomach," he announced in English, then added in twin language to his girlfriend. "Finally. I thought those pills would never work." The ship's doctor I'd confided in 3 days ago ran into the bathroom with her. They both came back an hour later with huge smiles and an ultrasound photo. "Congratulations, Mr. White and Mrs. Murphy. The ultrasound confirms you're 12 weeks pregnant, with twins." I picked my wife up and twirled her around. The color drained from my brother-in-law's face like someone pulled a plug. "That's," he stammered. "That's impossible. The doses she took." Every head in the dining room turned to face him. I stood up slowly. The words were forming in my mind, ready to destroy him in the language he thought was his secret weapon. I closed my mouth and sat back down, letting the moment pass. Everyone around us started clapping and congratulating us about the twins, and I pulled Olivia close while watching Tino's face cycle through confusion and panic. He kept looking at me like he expected me to say something, but I just smiled and nodded at all the well-wishers crowding our table. The smart play wasn't burning him in front of everyone. It was building a case so tight he couldn't wiggle out of it, because Olivia's health mattered more than my satisfaction. I waited until the crowd thinned out and Tino stood up to leave, then I grabbed his elbow and pulled him close. In the secret language, I whispered that his little plan didn't work, and I knew everything he'd done. His eyes went huge and his face turned white, but I kept my voice calm and quiet. I told him to enjoy his last few weeks of freedom before everything came crashing down on his head. He tried to stammer something back, but I just patted his shoulder and walked away, leaving him standing there shaking. After dinner wrapped up and Olivia went to the bathroom, I found Conrad near the ship's medical office organizing some papers. I pulled him into an empty conference room and explained the whole vitamin swap I'd done 3 days ago, showing him the original bottles I'd kept hidden in my bag. He listened without interrupting, then pulled out his tablet and started typing up an official medical note. He documented when I'd first confided in him, what I'd observed about Tino's behavior and the protective steps I'd taken to swap the pills. He printed it out, signed it, and handed me a copy, saying this paper trail showed exactly when I discovered the problem and what I did to protect my wife. I thanked him and headed toward the security office on deck 3, my heart pounding because I needed to lock down that footage before it disappeared. The security officer who'd handled Tino's buffet meltdown was at her desk reviewing camera feeds, and I explained I needed the footage preserved for potential legal action. She pulled up her system and scrolled through the incident logs, confirming they could hold everything for 90 days if I filed a formal report. I filled out the paperwork right there, giving detailed descriptions of Tino's threatening behavior and his screaming at staff members. She stamped it with a case number and promised the footage was now flagged in their system. Walking back toward our cabin, I spotted Clara standing alone by the railing on deck 7, staring out at the ocean with her arms wrapped around herself. She looked genuinely shaken up, not her usual cocky self, and she kept glancing around like she was worried someone might see her. I realized right then that she might crack under pressure if I played this right, because she didn't have Tino's arrogance to protect her from consequences. Back in our room, Olivia jumped in the shower to wash off the day, and I immediately pulled out the swapped pill containers from my hidden bag pocket. I photographed them from every angle with my phone's camera, making sure the timestamps were visible in each shot. I uploaded everything to 3 different cloud storage accounts because I'd watched enough crime documentaries to know evidence had a way of disappearing when you needed it most. My hands were still shaking when Olivia came out of the bathroom looking pale and tired, her hand resting on her stomach. I convinced her we should go back to Conrad's office to get the food poisoning checked out properly, just to be safe for the babies. She agreed without arguing, and we walked back down to the medical office together. Conrad examined her carefully, checked her temperature and blood pressure, then wrote a detailed note about the bad sushi she'd eaten at lunch. He gave me a knowing look while he typed, understanding exactly why this documentation mattered for building our case. The next morning, I woke up early and headed to the pool deck for coffee, my mind already running through what evidence I still needed to collect. That's when I heard Tino's voice speaking the secret language near the hot tub, bragging to Clara about the custom Tesla he'd already picked out. He described this downtown condo with floor-to-ceiling windows, like the money was already sitting in his bank account, completely blind to how his whole world was about to fall apart. I stood behind a decorative palm plant and just listened, amazed at how stupid he was acting. Later that morning near the breakfast buffet, I watched Clara pull Tino aside behind a pillar and suggest in the secret language that they should up the dose to make absolutely sure it worked. I was already standing behind another decorative plant with my phone out, my hands shaking with pure rage as I hit record. I captured every single word of their casual conversation about poisoning my wife, Clara's voice suggesting they double the amount just to be safe. My finger trembled on the stop button when they finally walked away, and I had to lean against the wall for a minute to calm down. At lunch, the security officer found me at our table and handed me a printed incident report with an official case number stamped across the top. She mentioned quietly that Tino's behavior was some of the worst she'd seen in her 15 years working cruise security, and the footage showed him clearly threatening multiple staff members. She'd flagged everything in the system with priority status, meaning it wouldn't get automatically deleted after the standard 30-day period. I folded the report carefully and put it in my pocket, feeling the weight of real evidence building up piece by piece. I didn't say a word. I just stared at him until he looked away. Then I guided Olivia out of the dining room while everyone whispered behind us. That night I barely slept, lying awake planning every detail of what came next, while Olivia slept peacefully beside me with her hand resting on her stomach. The next morning, we packed our bags in silence, and I made sure to grab every single piece of evidence I'd collected during the cruise. I stuffed the swapped pill bottles deep in my carry-on, wrapped in a plastic bag so they wouldn't rattle. Olivia moved slowly, still feeling sick from the food poisoning, and I kept my hand on her lower back the entire walk to the exit. The ship's crew thanked us for sailing with them, completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded in their dining room. Tino was waiting near the gangway with Clara, both of them looking like they hadn't slept either. He stepped forward with his arms out like he wanted to hug Olivia goodbye, his smile fake and stretched too tight across his face. She turned away to grab her purse, too nauseous to notice his expression, and he dropped his arms awkwardly. I stepped between them and locked eyes with him, letting him see exactly how much I knew and how much trouble he was in. His face went pale and he took a step back, mumbling something about traffic and needing to get going. Clara grabbed his arm and pulled him toward their rental car without another word. I loaded our luggage into our car and helped Olivia into the passenger seat, making sure she had water and crackers within reach. The 3-hour drive home stretched ahead of us, and I knew I needed to use that time to figure out how to tell her the truth. I pulled onto the highway and glanced over at her sleeping against the window, her face peaceful for the first time in days. My mind kept running through different versions of the conversation. I could start with the poisoning and work backward, or I could explain about the will first to give context. Every version I practiced in my head sounded terrible, like something that would shatter her completely. I thought about her standing on our balcony after the 5th miscarriage, screaming that her body was broken. I remembered pulling her back from the edge while she fought me and Tino, talking her down in that same secret language he'd used to plan her destruction. How do you tell someone that the person who saved their life also spent years trying to end it? I merged into the right lane and adjusted my grip on the steering wheel. My hands were shaking again, just like they had when I swapped those pills. I needed professional help with this, someone who understood trauma and pregnancy loss and family betrayal. I couldn't risk doing this wrong and sending her into another crisis. The twins needed her calm and healthy, and I needed her to survive hearing this truth. By the time we pulled into our driveway, I decided to find a therapist before saying anything. It felt like another betrayal, keeping secrets for even longer, but I couldn't see another way to do this safely. I helped Olivia inside, and she went straight to the couch, curling up with her hand on her belly. She looked up at me with this cautious joy in her eyes, the first real hope I'd seen in years. She started talking about baby names, suggesting options for both boys and girls since we didn't know yet. I sat down next to her and smiled, participating in the conversation while my stomach twisted with guilt. She liked Adeline and Noah, classic names that wouldn't get our kids teased at the school. I agreed with everything she said, adding my own suggestions, the whole time knowing I was lying by not telling her what her brother had done. Every hour I delayed felt like another small betrayal, another choice to protect her that took away her right to know the truth. She fell asleep around 9, exhausted from the pregnancy and the cruise, and I waited until her breathing was deep and steady. Then I grabbed my laptop and spent the next 2 hours organizing every piece of evidence I'd collected. I created folders for the audio recordings, the photos of the pills, the cruise incident reports, and the medical documentation from Conrad. I backed everything up to 3 different cloud storage accounts, using encrypted passwords that only I knew. I made a master document with timestamps for every recording, transcripts of what Tino and Clara had said, and links to all the supporting evidence. This needed to be perfect, airtight, impossible to dismiss or explain away. I saved everything one more time and closed my laptop around midnight, my eyes burning from staring at the screen. The next morning, I woke up early and started searching for certified translators online. The secret language Olivia and Tino spoke wasn't common, some regional dialect from their childhood that barely existed in written form. I called 6 different translation services and got nowhere, each one telling me they didn't have anyone who specialized in that specific variant. On the 7th call, the receptionist mentioned Sapphira Wyatt, a legal translator who handled rare language cases. I called her office immediately and explained what I needed without going into too much detail. She asked me to send a sample recording, so she could verify she could handle the dialect. I sent her a 30-second clip of Tino talking about the pills, and she called back within an hour confirming she could do it. Her rate was expensive, but I didn't care. This was too important to cut corners. While I was on the phone with Sapphira, I remembered Conrad mentioning a high-risk OBGYN back home who specialized in cases like Olivia's. I called their office and explained her history of 7 losses, the current twin pregnancy, and the circumstances we were dealing with. The receptionist's voice changed when I mentioned the number of miscarriages, becoming softer and more urgent. She said they could fit us in within 48 hours, which was faster than their normal scheduling. I booked the appointment and felt the first small bit of relief that we were building a real medical support team. I checked our shared family account monitoring system that afternoon, something I'd set up months ago to track expenses. Tino's spending spree showed up in detail, every transaction from the cruise visible in the records. The Pinnacle membership was there for $150,000, then designer clothes from the ship's boutique, electronics, restaurant bills that made my eyes water. He'd spent over $60,000 in just a few days, burning through money he didn't actually have yet. Part of me felt satisfied watching him dig his own grave, spending his inheritance before he ever got it. He was so confident in his plan that he'd already started living like a millionaire. On day 3 home, I sat in my car after work and realized I couldn't tell Olivia alone. The risk of her spiraling was too high, the betrayal too deep and personal. I needed a therapist present, someone who could help her process this safely without sending her into another crisis, someone who understood pregnancy loss trauma and complicated family dynamics. I spent the next 2 days calling every therapist in our area who specialized in reproductive trauma. Most were booked months out or didn't handle cases this complex. I left messages, sent emails, explained the urgency without revealing too many details. On the 6th call, I reached Faye Holloway's office, and her assistant listened to my situation carefully. She said Faye specialized in exactly this kind of case, reproductive trauma combined with family betrayal. Faye had an opening the following week and could do an emergency intake session where I could disclose everything with professional support in the room. I booked it immediately, feeling like I'd finally found someone who could help us through this. Sapphira called back that evening while I was making dinner. She explained her process in detail, how she'd need the original audio files with full context about the relationship and the circumstances. She'd have to verify the dialect authenticity, confirm the speakers' identities, and create both a preliminary transcript and a certified legal version. The preliminary version would take about 10 days, she said, with the certified version following a few days after that. I sent her everything that night using encrypted file transfer, every recording I'd made on the cruise with detailed notes about who was speaking and when. She confirmed receipt and promised to start working on it immediately, understanding how time-sensitive this was for us. 2 days later, we sat in the high-risk OBGYN's office while the doctor pulled up Olivia's medical history on her computer screen. She scrolled through the records slowly, her face getting more serious with each page. 7 documented losses over 4 years, each one noted with dates and circumstances. The doctor turned to face us and started asking detailed questions about each pregnancy, how far along Olivia had been, what symptoms she'd experienced, whether there were any patterns we'd noticed. I watched Olivia's hands twist together in her lap as she answered, her voice getting quieter with each loss she had to recount. The doctor typed notes constantly, nodding and making small sounds of acknowledgement. After 20 minutes of questions, she put down her tablet and explained that Olivia's case qualified as recurrent pregnancy loss, which meant we needed aggressive monitoring and support. She pulled out a calendar and started marking dates, explaining that we'd need weekly ultrasounds to track the twins' growth and watch for any warning signs. She wrote a prescription for progesterone supplements that Olivia would need to take twice daily, explaining how the hormone helped maintain the uterine lining and reduce miscarriage risk. Then she looked at both of us directly and said, stress management wasn't optional anymore, it was medical treatment. She explained how high cortisol levels could affect blood flow to the placenta and impact fetal development. Olivia needed to treat rest and calm as seriously as taking vitamins, because her body was working double time to support 2 babies after years of trauma. The appointment lasted 90 minutes and we left with a thick folder of information, multiple prescriptions, and our first ultrasound scheduled for the following week. The following week, I drove us to Faye's office for the emergency intake session I'd scheduled. The building was older with creaky wooden floors, and Faye's office had soft lighting and comfortable chairs that didn't feel clinical. She was probably in her 50s with gray streaked hair pulled back, wearing casual clothes that made the space feel more like a living room than a therapy office. She spent the first 15 minutes just talking with Olivia about the pregnancy, asking how she was feeling physically, what her hopes and fears were. I could see Olivia starting to relax slightly, her shoulders dropping from where they'd been hunched near her ears. Then Faye turned to me and asked if I wanted to share what had brought us in for an emergency session. My mouth went dry and I looked at Olivia, then back at Faye. I started with the cruise, explaining that we'd gone with family to celebrate before the baby came. Then I told them about overhearing a conversation in a language Olivia had taught me years ago, one she and her brother had spoken as kids. Faye asked what I'd heard, and I explained about the abortion pills, about Clara putting them in Olivia's vitamins, about the inheritance tied to whether Olivia had kids by the will reading. Olivia's face went completely blank for a moment, like her brain couldn't process what I was saying. Then her eyes got huge, and she turned to look at me with her mouth slightly open. I kept talking, explaining how I'd swapped the pills immediately, how I'd documented everything, how I'd waited to tell her until we had professional support. Olivia stood up suddenly, her chair scraping against the floor. Her face cycled through confusion, then denial, shaking her head like she could make the words untrue. Then understanding hit, and her expression shifted to pure horror, her hand going to her stomach protectively. She looked at me and her face twisted with rage so intense, I actually leaned back in my chair. She started screaming that her brother had killed her babies, all 7 of them, for money. Her voice got higher and louder with each word, asking how someone could do that to their own sister. Then she whirled on me and screamed that I'd known for over a week and hadn't told her, that I'd made decisions about her body and her safety without including her. She said everyone in her life was a liar, her brother had been poisoning her for years while pretending to care, and I'd kept this massive secret while acting like everything was normal. Her breathing got faster and shallower, and she started gasping between words. Faye stood up and moved closer to Olivia, speaking in a calm, low voice about breathing and grounding. She asked Olivia to name 5 things she could see in the room, then 4 things she could touch. Olivia was crying and hyperventilating, but she started naming objects with Faye's guidance. Her breathing slowly evened out over several minutes while I sat frozen in my chair, feeling like the worst person alive. I'd thought I was protecting her by waiting, but she was right that I'd taken away her choice. Faye kept Olivia focused on breathing and grounding for almost 10 minutes before the panic subsided enough for us to keep talking. Olivia collapsed back into her chair looking exhausted, tears still running down her face. She said she didn't know who to trust anymore, or how to process that her brother had spent years systematically killing her babies. Faye acknowledged how massive this betrayal was, how it touched every part of Olivia's life and identity. She said it was completely normal to feel overwhelmed and furious and lost all at once. We spent the next hour and a half working through what happens next. Faye kept bringing us back to priorities, asking what mattered most right now in this moment. Olivia said keeping the twins safe was number 1. Nothing else mattered if we lost these babies too. Faye wrote that down on a whiteboard, then asked what else. I said gathering evidence so we could hold Tino accountable legally. Faye wrote that as number 2. Olivia said confronting Tino came last because she couldn't handle seeing him right now without completely losing it. Faye created a clear plan on the board with 3 columns for safety, evidence, and eventual confrontation. Under safety, she listed all of Olivia's medical appointments, stress reduction requirements, and daily check-ins between us about how we were feeling. Under evidence, she listed the recordings I'd already made, the translator work in progress, and any legal consultations we needed. Under confrontation, she just wrote, "When ready," and with support. She made us both promise to communicate every single day about our emotional state, even if it was just a quick text saying we were okay. She gave us her emergency number and made us promise to call immediately if either of us felt overwhelmed or unsafe. By the end of the 2-hour session, we had a clear plan that felt manageable instead of crushing. Olivia was still angry with me. I could see it in how she wouldn't quite look at me directly, but she agreed the plan made sense. Faye scheduled us for weekly sessions and said we'd need couples work and individual work to process everything. That evening after we got home, I sat down at my laptop and prepared the audio files to send to Sapphira. I filled out the release forms she'd sent, signing everywhere that needed signatures and dating each page. I wrote a detailed email explaining who the speakers were, what our relationship was, and why we needed certified translation for legal purposes. I attached all 12 audio clips with timestamps and descriptions of what was discussed in each one. Before I hit send, I encrypted everything using the secure file transfer system Sapphira had provided. The upload took almost 20 minutes because the audio files were high quality. Sapphira responded within an hour, confirming she'd received everything, and the files had downloaded successfully. She explained in her email that legal certification was more complex than standard translation, because she needed to verify several things. First, she had to confirm the speakers' identities through voice analysis and any identifying information in the recordings. Second, she needed to authenticate that the recordings hadn't been edited or manipulated. Third, she had to verify the dialect authenticity by comparing it to known samples of the language variant. All of this documentation was required to make the translation admissible in court proceedings. She estimated the preliminary transcript would take about 10 days to complete, with the certified version following 3 to 5 days after that. The timeline felt long, but I understood why it couldn't be rushed. Our second OBGYN appointment came a week later, and this time the doctor spent more time reviewing the previous losses. She asked specific questions about what had happened with each pregnancy, looking for any patterns or warning signs we might have missed. When I mentioned the vitamins Olivia had been taking, the doctor made detailed notes and asked about the brand, dosage, and how long she'd been using them. She explained that chronic stress from repeated losses could actually impact pregnancy outcomes by keeping cortisol levels constantly high. The body interprets ongoing stress as a dangerous environment, which can affect hormone production and blood flow to the uterus. She prescribed specific relaxation techniques including guided meditation, deep breathing exercises, and progressive muscle relaxation. She referred us to a prenatal yoga class that met twice a week and specialized in high-risk pregnancies. The instructor apparently had training in trauma-informed practices, which the doctor said was important given Olivia's history. Then she looked at both of us seriously and said Olivia needed to avoid emotional upheaval as much as humanly possible. She acknowledged that life doesn't always cooperate with medical advice, but we needed to treat emotional calm as a prescription, not a suggestion. She explained that the twins were developing normally so far, but twin pregnancies carried higher risks even without Olivia's complicated history. We needed to do everything possible to reduce stress and support her body through this. 2 days after that appointment, I contacted Lucian Mansfield using the information a colleague had given me. His office was downtown in one of those old buildings with marble floors and wood paneling. I called and explained to his assistant that I needed help understanding a will's conditions and some legal options regarding inheritance and poisoning. The assistant asked a few screening questions, then said Lucian could see us the following week for an initial consultation. I booked the appointment and spent the next few days organizing all our documentation. I created a timeline of events, printed out bank records showing Tino's spending, and compiled the cruise incident reports. I wanted to walk into that meeting with everything organized, so we could use the time efficiently. The consultation with Lucian happened in his conference room with a view of the city. He was probably 60 with silver hair and reading glasses that he kept taking on and off. We spent the first 20 minutes just explaining the situation while he took notes on a legal pad. Then he asked to see Grandfather Thaddeus's will, which I'd brought a copy of. He read through it carefully, marking certain sections with sticky notes. After about 15 minutes of reading, he looked up and explained something I hadn't understood before. The will had what he called a discretionary conduct clause that gave the trustee power to delay or deny distributions if an heir's behavior caused harm to other family members. He said this was actually more powerful than the pregnancy deadline because it focused on Tino's actions rather than Olivia's pregnancy status. We didn't have to prove that Tino had violated the pregnancy condition by poisoning her. We just needed to show that he'd acted with malicious intent to harm Olivia, and the trustee could use their discretion to pause or deny his inheritance based on that conduct. Lucian explained that discretionary clauses existed specifically for situations like this, where someone tried to manipulate inheritance conditions through harmful actions. The trustee's job was to evaluate whether distributing money to Tino would be appropriate given his behavior toward another beneficiary. This completely changed how I understood our legal position. That same afternoon, my email pinged with a message from the cruise security office. They'd sent the full incident report as a PDF attachment, along with a spreadsheet listing available footage timestamps. The report documented 3 separate incidents where Tino had threatened staff members, used profane language toward other passengers, and refused to follow crew instructions. Each incident had detailed witness statements from staff and passengers who'd observed his behavior. The footage timestamps covered everything from his explosion at the buffet to his confrontation with the cruise director about the membership. The security officer's notes described his behavior as aggressive, entitled, and potentially dangerous. She'd noted that his claims about owning the cruise line and firing staff members suggested either substance abuse or mental instability. The report included photos of the signed Pinnacle membership contract showing the amount and his signature. Everything was documented with official letterhead and case numbers, creating a chain of custody that proved when and how each incident occurred. I downloaded everything to 3 different backup locations and added it to our evidence file. The next week, Olivia and I went back to Faye's office for our second couples session. This time, Faye focused specifically on rebuilding trust between us after my delayed disclosure. She asked me directly why I'd waited over a week to tell Olivia about the poisoning. I explained that I was scared she'd spiral into another crisis like after the 5th loss, that I wanted professional support in place first. Faye nodded and asked if I understood how that decision had taken away Olivia's agency over information about her own body. I said yes, I got it now, but in the moment I'd only been thinking about keeping her safe. Faye explained that my protective instinct wasn't wrong, but the execution was, because I'd made a unilateral decision that affected both of us. She had Olivia explain how it felt to learn I'd known for days while acting normal, and Olivia said it made her question whether she could trust me to be honest when things were hard. We spent an hour creating specific agreements about communication going forward. I promised to share information that affected her immediately, even if I was scared of her reaction. She promised to tell me when she felt overwhelmed, so we could get support together instead of me making assumptions. We agreed to daily check-ins where we each shared one thing we were feeling, even if it was uncomfortable. Faye said rebuilding trust after a breach takes consistent action over time, not just apologies. She gave us homework to practice the daily check-ins and to notice when we felt tempted to hide things from each other to avoid conflict. 2 days after our therapy session, an email from Sapphira landed in my inbox with a PDF attachment labeled Preliminary Transcript Analysis. I opened it at the kitchen table while Olivia was showering, and my hands started shaking as I read through the first page. Sapphira had organized everything by timestamp and topic, with notes about audio clarity and dialect verification next to each section. She'd found 12 separate conversations where Tino and Clara discussed the poisoning in detail. Instance 1 was from the pool deck when Clara asked about increasing the dosage. Instance 4 was Tino bragging about his 7 successful attempts. Instance 9 was them calculating how to split the $4 million. Each conversation was transcribed word for word in both the original language and English, with Sapphira's certification stamp on every page. The notes explained that the dialect was authentic to the region where Olivia and Tino grew up, and certain phrases could only be spoken by native speakers from that specific area. I printed 3 copies and locked them in our fireproof safe before Olivia came downstairs. That afternoon, Olivia sat on our bed with her phone in both hands, typing and deleting the same message to Tino over and over. Her fingers moved across the screen, then stopped, then started again. I offered to write it for her, but she shook her head hard. She needed to do this herself, she said, because setting boundaries was part of taking back control. After 20 minutes, she showed me the final version. It said she needed space to focus on her health and wouldn't be in contact until after the will reading. No explanation, no accusations, just a clear statement of what she needed. Her thumb hovered over the send button for a full minute before she finally pressed it. The message showed as delivered, then read within seconds. Olivia powered off her phone immediately and handed it to me to hold. The next morning, Tino's name lit up Olivia's phone screen at 7 in the morning. I was making breakfast when it started buzzing on the counter, and Olivia froze with her orange juice halfway to her mouth. She walked over slowly and stared at the screen, tears already forming in her eyes. The phone kept ringing and ringing, and I could see her face crumbling as she watched his name flash over and over. When it finally stopped, a voicemail notification popped up. Olivia didn't listen to it. She just stood there shaking, and then she declined the call history, went into her settings, and blocked his number without saying a single word to me. Her hands were steady when she did it, even though her face was wet. 3 hours later, Clara's name appeared in a text message that made Olivia laugh in this harsh, bitter way that scared me. The message said she was sorry if anything seemed weird on the cruise, and she hoped Olivia was feeling better. No mention of pills, no mention of Tino's plan, just this careful non-apology that avoided admitting anything specific. Olivia turned her phone toward me so I could read it, and she said Clara was covering herself now that she realized there might be consequences. She didn't respond to the message, just screenshotted it and added it to our evidence folder. Our weekly ultrasound appointment fell on Thursday morning, and the tech did all the normal measurements while Olivia lay on the exam table watching the monitor. Both babies looked good, moving around and measuring right on schedule. But when the doctor came in to review everything, she frowned at the blood pressure reading and took it again manually. The second reading came back even higher than the first. The doctor sat down and explained that Olivia's numbers were creeping into a concerning range, and we needed to treat stress reduction as seriously as we treated prenatal vitamins. She said high cortisol levels from ongoing stress could affect how the babies developed, and this wasn't optional anymore. She prescribed specific breathing exercises, cut Olivia's work hours to part-time, and scheduled twice-weekly monitoring appointments to track the blood pressure trend. Olivia nodded through all of it, looking pale and scared, and I held her hand the whole drive home. That same afternoon, Lucian called my cell with information about grandfather Thaddeus's will that changed how I understood our entire situation. He explained that Olivia's pregnancy status at the reading wasn't actually the controlling factor for distribution, because the will included something called a discretionary conduct clause. The trustee had the power to pause or deny funds to any heir whose behavior harmed another family member, regardless of whether they technically met the inheritance conditions. This meant that even if Tino thought he'd won by preventing Olivia's pregnancy, the trustee could still investigate his actions and hold his money indefinitely. Lucian said these clauses existed specifically for situations like ours, where someone tried to manipulate inheritance rules through harmful acts. I asked him how strong our case was, and he said with the evidence we had, extremely strong. Over the next week, I turned our spare bedroom into a war room for organizing evidence. I spread everything across the desk in chronological order, starting with the crew's audio recordings and ending with Clara's non-apology text. I had Dr. Holloway's medical notes documenting the vitamin swap and Olivia's miscarriage history. I had the crew security incident report with timestamps of Tino's 3 separate outbursts. I had bank statements showing Tino's spending spree, including the $150,000 cruise membership he signed while drunk. I had photos of the original poisoned vitamins next to the sugar pills I'd swapped them with, all with metadata showing when and where I took them. I compiled everything into a master document with a table of contents, exhibits labeled A through M, and a timeline that showed exactly when each event happened. The final dossier was 60 pages long and told the complete story from start to finish. I printed 5 copies and saved digital versions in 3 different cloud accounts with different passwords. 10 days after sending the preliminary transcript, Sapphira emailed again with the completed certified translation. This version had a notarized affidavit attached that confirmed she'd personally verified the speakers' identities by comparing voice patterns to reference recordings. She'd authenticated the dialect as genuine and specific to the geographic region. She'd certified the content accuracy and translation quality according to legal standards for court admissibility. The affidavit explained that her certification made the transcript valid evidence in both civil and criminal proceedings, which meant we had real legal power now. She'd included her credentials, professional certifications, and a statement that she'd stake her reputation on the accuracy of this work. I added the certified version to our evidence dossier and updated all the backup copies. Every morning for the next 2 weeks, I heard Olivia in the bathroom practicing what she'd say to Tino at the will reading. She stood in front of the mirror with her hands on her belly, saying the words out loud over and over. She told her reflection that she knew everything, that she had proof of everything, and that she wouldn't have contact with him until all legal matters were resolved. Her voice cracked the first few times, but by the end of the second week, she could say it without crying. Faye coached her through different scenarios during our therapy sessions, playing Tino's role and throwing out the kinds of denials and manipulations he might try. Olivia practiced staying calm when Faye pretended to call her crazy, when she acted like the evidence was fake, when she played the victim card. By the end of each session, Olivia could deliver her statement clearly and firmly, no matter what reaction Faye threw at her. 3 days before the will reading, Lucian called with strategic advice that surprised me. He said we shouldn't ambush Tino at the reading itself, because that could make us look vindictive and hurt the trustee's ability to make an objective decision. Instead, he suggested we share all our evidence privately with the trustee's office beforehand and let the professional process handle the confrontation. He explained that trustees dealt with family conflicts all the time and knew how to manage these situations without turning them into public spectacles. If we handed over the evidence quietly, the trustee could review everything, make informed decisions, and control how information got disclosed at the reading. This approach protected our credibility and gave the trustee the power to shut down any of Tino's attempts to manipulate the situation. I asked Olivia what she thought, and she agreed that letting professionals handle it was smarter than trying to have our dramatic moment. We wanted justice and protection, not revenge theater. 2 days after our strategy session with Lucian, a notification popped up on my phone while I was making breakfast. Clara had sent me a direct message through Instagram, which surprised me because we'd never communicated that way before. Her message was short, but I could feel the panic through the screen. She wrote that she needed to talk to me privately and asked if we could meet somewhere public. The way she phrased everything made it clear she was scared about what might happen to her legally. She hinted that she had information to share, but wanted to know what kind of trouble she was facing first. I showed the message to Olivia, and she stared at it for a long time before nodding. We both knew Clara was trying to save herself, but if she had evidence, we needed it. I messaged back suggesting a coffee shop downtown that was always busy, picking a place where she couldn't try anything stupid. She agreed immediately, and we set it for the next afternoon at 2 o'clock. The rest of that day dragged by while I thought about what Clara might offer and whether it would actually help our case. I kept checking my phone to see if she'd cancel, but she didn't send anything else. The next day, I arrived at the coffee shop 15 minutes early and picked a table near the windows where other people could see us clearly. Clara showed up exactly on time, looking terrible, with dark circles under her eyes and her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She ordered a latte and sat down across from me, her hands shaking as she wrapped them around the cup. She started talking fast, saying she knew about the pills, but Tino had pressured her into helping. She claimed he'd told her the vitamins were just to prevent pregnancy, not cause miscarriages, and she'd believed him at first. I didn't buy that excuse for a second, but I let her keep talking. She said she had the remaining poison at home and screenshots of texts where they'd discussed getting it. Then she got to the real point, asking if she handed everything over, would it keep her out of jail? She kept repeating that question in different ways, making it obvious her cooperation was about saving herself, not making things right. I told her I couldn't make any promises about criminal charges, but having evidence would definitely matter. She nodded and asked when I could meet again to get everything from her. I left the coffee shop and walked straight to my car, pulling out my phone before I even started the engine. Lucian answered on the second ring, and I explained the whole conversation while sitting in the parking lot. He listened carefully, and then told me he couldn't grant Clara any kind of immunity, because that wasn't how the system worked. He said he could note her cooperation to authorities if she provided solid evidence, which might help her case when prosecutors got involved. Then he warned me that her cooperation was probably more about self-preservation than genuine remorse, but useful evidence was still useful regardless of her motives. He told me to get whatever she was offering and document everything about how she gave it to me. I asked if I should record our next meeting, and he said yes, making sure my phone was visible, so she knew she was recorded. That way there couldn't be any question later about what she said or gave me. Clara and I met again the next day at the same coffee shop. This time she brought a folder stuffed with papers and her phone ready to show me screenshots. She handed over photos of the pill packaging that showed the brand name and dosage information clearly. The screenshots showed text conversations between her and Tino where they discussed where to buy the substance and how much to use. She'd even kept her own bottle of the stuff they'd used, a small amber container with a medical label that made my stomach turn. Her hands shook the whole time she was giving me everything, making the papers rustle. She kept asking if this would keep her out of jail, her voice getting higher each time. I took photos of everything with my phone right there at the table and told her again that I couldn't make promises, but this was the right thing to do. She looked like she might cry, but held it together. Before she left, she made me promise to tell the lawyer she cooperated, and I said I would because it was true. That week, we had our regular therapy session with Faye, and I brought the folder Clara had given me. Olivia and I sat on the couch in Faye's office while I explained the new evidence and what Clara had admitted. Faye listened to everything, and then helped us talk through what it meant without letting it take over our whole focus. She reminded us that our main goal was safety, and making sure Tino was held accountable, not getting revenge or making people suffer. She pointed out that we needed to stay focused on the baby's health above everything else, because stress could affect the pregnancy. Olivia admitted she felt angry that Clara was trying to save herself after helping poison her for months. Faye validated that anger, but also helped Olivia see that Clara's cooperation gave us tools to protect our family. By the end of the session, we both felt more centered and clear about what mattered most. 2 days later, we had our scheduled ultrasound appointment. The doctor squeezed gel on Olivia's belly and moved the wand around while we watched the screen. Both babies appeared on the monitor, their tiny hearts beating fast and strong. The doctor measured them carefully and said they were growing right on schedule for their gestational age. Then she explained the real risks we needed to watch for with twin pregnancy. She talked about preeclampsia, which meant Olivia's blood pressure could get dangerous. She mentioned premature delivery was more common with twins, and we might need to plan for an early birth. She explained signs to watch for, like sudden swelling or severe headaches. But she also said everything looked good right now, and she was optimistic about the pregnancy. We left feeling hopeful, but also aware that we needed to be careful and watch for problems. The following week, Lucian called to tell us he'd scheduled a private meeting with Dex from the trustee's office. The meeting was set for the week before the will reading, giving Dex time to review everything thoroughly. Lucian explained that presenting evidence privately was smarter than ambushing Tino at the reading itself. This way, the trustee could look at everything carefully and make informed decisions about who should get money and who shouldn't. He said trustees dealt with family conflicts all the time and knew how to handle these situations professionally. If we gave Dex the evidence ahead of time, he could control how information got shared at the reading and shut down any attempts by Tino to manipulate things. Lucian reminded us this protected our credibility and let professionals handle the confrontation instead of us trying to create some dramatic moment. On the day of our meeting with Dex, Lucian met us at the trustee's office downtown. We brought the complete evidence packet we'd been building for weeks. Inside were the certified transcripts from Sapphira, all of Dr. Holloway's medical notes from the cruise, the witness statements, Clara's cooperation evidence with the photos and texts, and the cruise documentation about Tino's behavior. Dex sat behind a big desk and opened the folder, reading through the table of contents first. His expression got more and more serious as he flipped through pages. He stopped on the transcript section and read some of the translated conversations out loud to himself. Then he looked up at us and said, "This was thorough work." He promised to investigate everything completely before any money got distributed to anyone. He made notes on a legal pad about things he wanted to verify independently. The meeting lasted almost 2 hours, and by the end, Dex seemed convinced we had a real case. 3 days before the will reading, an envelope arrived from the cruise line's legal department. Inside was a formal letter on company letterhead describing Tino's behavior during the cruise. The letter said he'd been threatening and aggressive toward staff members. It listed specific incidents where employees had filed formal complaints about him. There were details about his screaming match at the buffet and his demands that he owned the cruise line. This documentation came from a completely neutral third party who had no reason to lie or exaggerate. The cruise line's lawyers had no stake in our family drama, which made their letter really powerful evidence. I scanned it immediately and sent copies to both Lucian and Dex, adding it to our case file. That same week, someone sent me a link to a public review posted online about Tino's business. His former client, Chandler, had written a detailed review about Tino's unprofessional conduct and breach of contract. The review explained how Tino had cursed at him during a video call and refused to complete work he'd been paid for. What made it even better was Tino's response in the comments. He'd written a long ranting comment about not needing peasant clients anymore and how he was about to be rich enough to buy 10 companies. His comment was public for anyone to see, creating a permanent digital record of his arrogance and terrible judgment. I screenshot the whole exchange and added it to our evidence file, knowing it showed exactly what kind of person Tino really was. 2 days after I added that screenshot to our file, Sapphira sent an email confirming she could attend the will reading in person if we needed her there. She explained that having the certified translator present meant Tino couldn't argue the transcripts were fake or mistranslated wrong. Her physical presence would shut down any escape route he tried to use about the language evidence. I forwarded her confirmation to Lucian immediately, and he responded within an hour saying this was perfect for our case. The next afternoon, Lucian called us to his office for a coaching session about the will reading itself. He sat across from us at his conference table and explained that Tino's parents would probably try to defend him or pressure Olivia into forgiving him for family peace. He coached us through different scenarios, making us practice staying calm and referring all questions to him as our attorney. He told us to keep our responses short and professional, not to get pulled into emotional arguments or family guilt trips. Olivia practiced saying simple phrases like asking Lucian to answer that question or stating she wasn't discussing it right now. By the end of the session, we both felt more prepared to handle whatever Tino's family threw at us during the reading. 3 days before the scheduled will reading, an envelope arrived at our house from a legal courier service. Inside was a short written statement from Clara on official letterhead from a lawyer's office. She admitted her role in the poisoning scheme and wrote that she was scared of Tino's reaction if she'd refused to help him. Her statement was obviously self-serving, trying to paint herself as a victim of his manipulation rather than a willing partner. But it still worked for our case because it gave the trustee another source confirming the same story we were telling. I scanned Clara's statement and sent it to both Lucian and Dex, adding one more piece to the pile of evidence against Tino. The night before the will reading, Olivia and I sat in our living room talking about what we actually wanted from tomorrow. We were both exhausted from weeks of evidence gathering and legal preparation. She said she didn't want some big dramatic moment where we humiliated Tino in front of everyone. She just wanted the trustee process to handle everything professionally while we focused on staying calm for the babies. I agreed completely because revenge satisfaction wasn't worth risking her blood pressure or the pregnancy. We called Faye on speakerphone and told her our decision to let the professionals handle the confrontation. She said this choice was mature and healthy, that we were prioritizing our actual family over the satisfaction of watching Tino crash. Her validation made us both feel better about taking the quiet route instead of the spectacle route. On the morning of the will reading, we met with Dex privately at his office an hour before the official reading started. We brought the final evidence packet that included everything from the past month, Clara's new statement, and the cruise line's formal letter. Dex spread all the documents across his desk and read through them carefully, making notes on a legal pad. His expression got more serious with each page he reviewed. When he reached the translated conversations about poisoning, he read several passages out loud to himself and shook his head slowly. He looked up at us after 20 minutes and said this was thorough professional work. He promised to handle the distribution hold announcement professionally and to give Tino a chance to respond to the allegations before making any final decisions. We thanked him and headed to the lobby to wait for the reading to start. In the lobby outside the conference room, other family members started arriving 15 minutes before the scheduled start time. Tino walked in wearing a brand new designer suit and flashing a luxury watch that probably cost $10,000. He was whispering to Clara in the secret language about his guaranteed payout and how he'd already picked out the car he wanted. He looked so confident and relaxed, like he'd already won everything. He didn't notice Dex standing near the reception desk watching him with a cold, professional look. Clara seemed nervous, her eyes darting around the lobby and avoiding eye contact with us. Tino's parents arrived next and hugged Olivia, asking how she was feeling with the pregnancy. She smiled and said she was doing well, keeping her responses short like Lucian had coached. The reading began exactly on time in a large conference room with a long table. Lucian started by outlining the will's basic structure, and then explained the discretionary clause about conduct that harms family members. He read the exact language from the will about how the trustee could delay or deny distributions if an heir acted badly toward other family members. Tino barely paid attention, scrolling through his phone and smirking at something on his screen. He looked completely unaware that the trustee already knew everything about his poisoning scheme. His parents listened carefully to Lucian's explanation, but Tino just seemed bored and ready to get his money. Then Dex stood up and cleared his throat to get everyone's attention. He announced that Tino's distribution was temporarily on hold, pending review of materials submitted about his conduct toward family members. The entire room went completely silent. You could hear people breathing and the air conditioning humming. Tino's face shifted from bored confidence to confused panic in about 2 seconds. He looked around the table trying to figure out what went wrong with his perfect plan. His parents exchanged worried glances and Clara went pale, staring down at her hands. Tino jumped up from his chair and demanded to know what materials and who submitted them. His voice got loud and aggressive, the same tone he'd used on the cruise when he screamed at the buffet staff. Dex remained calm and professional, explaining that he'd received evidence about Tino's conduct and needed to investigate before releasing any funds. That's when Sapphira stood up from her seat near the back of the room. She introduced herself as a certified translator and explained she'd been hired to translate recordings made during a family cruise. She opened a folder and started reading from the certified transcript in a calm, clear voice. She read Tino's exact words about the abortion pills working perfectly. She read his conversation about the $4 million inheritance if Olivia didn't have kids. She read Clara's response about not wanting a measly $600,000. She read their discussion about upping the dosage and their celebration about being rich. Tino's parents gasped out loud and his mother put her hand over her mouth. Clara started crying, tears running down her face as she heard her own words read back. Tino's face went from angry red to sick white as his own voice in translation condemned him in front of his entire family. He tried to interrupt, but Sapphira kept reading, her voice steady and professional. She read the part about 7 necessary business decisions and Tino's comment about Olivia popping out babies after the will reading. By the time Sapphira finished reading, Tino's father was staring at him with complete horror and disgust. Then Olivia stood up with her hands shaking but her voice firm. She'd prepared a statement with Faye's help and practiced it dozens of times. She said she knew everything about what Tino did. She had evidence of everything, including medical records and witness statements. She would not have any contact with Tino until all legal matters were completely resolved. Her voice cracked on a few words, but she kept going, reading from the paper in her hands. She said her brother had tried to kill her babies for money, and she would never forgive that betrayal. She said the trust could do whatever it wanted with his money, but she wanted nothing to do with him anymore. When she finished, she sat down and grabbed my hand under the table. I'd never been more proud of her strength and courage in that moment, watching her set boundaries and speak her truth despite everything. That afternoon, Lucian drove us to the police station in his car, while I held Olivia's hand in the back seat. She stared out the window without saying anything, and I could feel her fingers trembling against mine. The detective who met us was a woman in her 40s with short gray hair, who introduced herself and led us to a small interview room with a table and chairs. Lucian explained we were there to report poisoning and conspiracy, and the detective pulled out a notepad and started taking notes. She asked Olivia to describe what happened, and Olivia's voice shook as she explained the 7 miscarriages and how she thought her body was broken. I handed over the evidence folder with all the recordings and transcripts and medical records, and the detective spent 20 minutes reviewing everything without speaking. When she finally looked up, her expression was serious, and she said the quality of evidence made this a strong case for prosecution. She explained they would need to interview Clara separately and collect the remaining pills as physical evidence, and that the investigation would take several weeks minimum. Lucian asked about keeping this quiet to protect Olivia's privacy, and the detective nodded, saying they would handle it professionally without media involvement. We spent 2 more hours going through every detail and signing statements, and by the time we left the station, it was dark outside. Within 48 hours, Clara called the detective directly and asked to come in. The detective contacted Lucian first to let us know, and explained that Clara wanted cooperation credit to reduce her own charges. Clara showed up at the station with a lawyer and turned over the remaining pills in their original packaging, plus screenshots of text messages where she and Tino discussed buying the poison online. She also handed over handwritten notes in Tino's writing that laid out the whole plan with dates and dosage amounts. The detective called us that evening and confirmed that Clara's evidence backed up everything we'd said and made the criminal case against Tino much stronger. She said Clara was clearly trying to save herself, but the evidence was still useful regardless of her motives. Lucian explained that Clara's cooperation might help her avoid jail time, but she would still face charges as an accomplice. I asked if this meant Tino would definitely be charged, and the detective said yes. The prosecutor's office was already reviewing the case file. 3 days after that, Tino's attorney called Lucian asking to discuss plea negotiations. Lucian put the call on speaker so we could hear, and the attorney sounded tired and stressed as he explained that the evidence against Tino was too strong to fight in court. He said a trial would be devastating for Tino and result in certain conviction with possible jail time. Lucian listened without saying much, and then told the attorney we would consider any reasonable offer, but Tino needed to accept full responsibility and agree to stay away from Olivia permanently. The attorney said he would talk to his client and get back to us. That same afternoon, Dex called from the trust office and said they were keeping Tino's funds paused for now, not automatically taking them away, but the pause would continue until all criminal proceedings were finished and any payback arrangements were settled. He explained this meant Tino wouldn't see any inheritance money for years at minimum, and possibly never depending on how the case went. Olivia sat next to me during the call and squeezed my hand hard when Dex said the word years. 2 weeks after the will reading, we went to our next appointment with the high-risk baby doctor. The nurse took Olivia's blood pressure 3 times because the first reading was too high, and the second one wasn't much better. The doctor came in looking concerned and checked the numbers herself before sitting down to talk to us. She said Olivia's blood pressure was up again, and that meant we needed to take stress reduction very seriously starting right now. She told Olivia to cut back her work hours to part-time maximum and to rest every afternoon lying down for at least an hour. The doctor explained that twin pregnancies were already high risk, even without family drama and legal cases, and that we needed to treat Olivia's health as the most important thing above everything else. She said high blood pressure could lead to early delivery or other problems, and that we couldn't take any chances. Olivia started crying in the exam room, and the doctor handed her tissues and said it was okay to be upset, but we needed a plan to protect the babies. We left with a list of things Olivia had to do every day, including specific foods to eat and activities to avoid, and instructions to call immediately if she felt dizzy or had headaches. In our next couples therapy session with Faye, I had to face something I'd been avoiding. Faye looked directly at me and said we needed to talk about how I'd waited over a week to tell Olivia about the poisoning instead of telling her right away on the cruise. Her voice was gentle, but firm as she explained that I'd put my own judgment about what Olivia could handle above Olivia's right to know what was happening to her own body. Olivia sat across from me with her arms crossed and said she understood I was trying to protect her, but that keeping secrets made her feel like she couldn't trust me to tell her the truth when it mattered. I felt sick hearing her say that because she was completely right. Faye made us create specific repair steps, including checking in with each other every single day about how we were feeling and promising that I would never make big decisions about Olivia's safety without talking to her first. She also said I needed to start my own individual therapy to work on my issues with being overprotective and trying to control things I couldn't control. I agreed to everything because I knew I'd messed up badly, even though my intentions were good. A month after the will reading, the prosecutor called Lucian with a formal plea deal offer for Tino. Lucian came to our house to explain it in person, and we sat at the kitchen table while he went through the details. The prosecutor was offering Tino a deal where he would plead guilty to giving someone a harmful substance on purpose and accept 3 years of probation, plus required therapy sessions, and a plan to pay back all of Olivia's medical costs and therapy bills. Lucian said Tino's attorney was pushing him hard to take the deal because going to trial would almost certainly result in jail time, given how strong the evidence was. The prosecutor wanted an answer within 2 weeks. Olivia asked what would happen if Tino refused the deal, and Lucian said then they would go to trial, and Tino would probably end up in jail for at least a year, maybe more. I asked if the probation meant Tino would be monitored, and Lucian said yes. He would have to report to a probation officer regularly and follow strict rules, including staying away from us completely. The next week, Dex asked us to come to his office to discuss the trust arrangements going forward. He sat behind his desk with a thick folder in front of him and explained that the trust would set very specific conditions for any future money going to Tino. The conditions would be tied to Tino completing his therapy requirements and making all his payback payments on time and maintaining the no-contact boundaries with Olivia. Dex said the money wasn't gone forever, but Tino would have to prove he was actually getting better and taking responsibility over a period of years before the trust would consider releasing any funds to him. He emphasized that this wasn't about punishment, but about making sure Tino demonstrated real change before getting access to that kind of money. Olivia asked how long it might take, and Dex said honestly it could be 5 years or more depending on Tino's progress and cooperation. He also said the trust would be monitoring Tino's compliance closely, and any violation of the boundaries would reset the whole timeline. When I reached my 3rd trimester of pregnancy, Olivia started having contractions at 34 weeks. We rushed to the hospital at 2 in the morning, and the doctors tried to stop the labor, but it kept progressing. The twins were born 6 hours later, weighing 4 pounds each, and they were tiny, but breathing on their own, which the doctor said was a good sign. They got moved to the NICU right away for feeding support and monitoring because babies born that early need extra help. We spent the next 2 weeks practically living at the hospital doing skin-to-skin contact and learning how to feed them through tiny tubes. It was scary watching them in their little plastic boxes with wires attached, but the nurses were amazing and patient with all our questions. The babies gained weight slowly and learned to eat better, and after 14 days, the doctor said they were stable enough to come home. We brought them back to our house with a car full of medical supplies and instructions and a follow-up appointment scheduled for the next week. While we were still doing the NICU routine, a letter arrived at our house forwarded through Tino's attorney. I opened it in the hospital parking lot before going inside and read it twice to make sure I understood what it said. Tino had written that he'd been sober for 2 months and going to therapy twice a week, and he wanted to say he knew he'd hurt Olivia badly and destroyed her trust. The letter didn't ask for forgiveness or request contact, it just said he understood what he'd done was terrible and he was working on becoming a better person. I brought the letter inside and showed it to Olivia while she was holding one of the babies against her chest. She read it once very slowly, then folded it up and put it in her bag without saying anything for a long time. Finally, she said maybe someday she would be ready to respond to him, but today wasn't that day, and she didn't know when that day would come. After the babies came home, we had another session with Faye to work out the final contact boundaries for our family. Faye helped us write down exactly what we were comfortable with and what we absolutely were not okay with. We decided that Tino's parents could visit the babies at our house, but only with us present the whole time, and only after calling ahead to schedule it. Tino himself would have zero contact until he finished his full probation period, and both Olivia and I agreed we were ready, which might be years from now, or might be never. Faye said the boundaries felt protective rather than mean, and that they gave everyone space to heal without forcing relationships that weren't ready. She reminded us that boundaries could change over time as situations changed, but for now, these rules would keep our family safe while letting Tino's parents still be grandparents in a limited way. 3 months later, an envelope arrived from Dex's office with the trust's official letterhead, and I opened it at our kitchen table while the twins napped in their nursery. The notification explained that Tino remained under a monitored rehabilitation plan with no current access to any funds, and the trust would review his progress annually for at least the next 5 years. Our family received a modest grant for medical expenses and childcare support, totaling $12,000, which would help with the NICU bills and ongoing pediatric appointments. I read the letter twice and felt grateful, but not dependent because we'd already set up our own savings plan and knew we could handle things without waiting for inheritance money to fix our problems. Olivia came into the kitchen holding our daughter, who'd just woken up fussy, and I showed her the letter while our son started crying from the other room. She scanned it quickly and nodded before handing me the baby so she could go get our son, and we didn't really discuss it much because we'd already moved past needing that money to feel secure. The twins kept us busy every single day with feeding schedules and diaper changes and doctor visits, and we fell into bed exhausted most nights without energy left to think about Tino or the trust or anything beyond getting through the next day. Now I'm sitting in our living room at midnight with both twins finally asleep in their bassinets after an hour of rocking and shushing, and Olivia's curled up next to me on the couch looking completely worn out, but genuinely calm for the first time in months. We didn't get some perfect ending where everything worked out exactly right, or where Tino got exactly what he deserved, or where all of Olivia's trauma just disappeared. What we got instead was boundaries that actually work for our family, 2 healthy babies who are growing despite being born early, and the knowledge that when it really mattered, I protected them the best way I knew how. Olivia's hand rests on my arm, and she's half asleep but smiling slightly, and I know we're going to be okay, even though okay doesn't mean perfect or easy or completely healed from everything that happened.